Welcome to Trustworthy AI, De-Risk Adoption of AI. I'm your host, Pamela Gupta, founder of Trusted AI and global advisor on AI governance and cybersecurity, also creator of the AI Tips Framework, which, as you probably know by now, stands for Trust Integrated Pillars for Sustainability. The focus being building secure, transparent, and accountable AI systems that can help operationalize AI governance for businesses. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Paul Dongha. Paul is one of the sharpest minds in AI governance, with deep experience in helping organizations translate AI principles into real-world decision-making. He is a co-author of a new book, Governing the Machine, which tackles really tough problems and challenges that we are all looking at solving, namely around controlling, constraining, and directly constraining powerful systems, AI systems that can they can be aligned with humans and societal goals. So in this conversation, we're going to unpack what AI governance is, what it makes it effective, what does it look like beyond PowerPoint slides and 2D context, but into the decision-making at board levels, at executives, practitioners, how to help move the needle and how to move from abstract principles to concrete guardrails. So, brief intro on Dr. Dongha. Dr. Paul Dongha is head of responsible AI and AI strategy at NatWest Group, which, as you may know, is one of the largest banks in the UK. He leads a dedicated team of AI practitioners and pioneering responsible AI in financial services. He also leads the bank's AI strategy, and I'm really interested in going more into that with Paul, to ensure AI provides not only a highly personalized customer experience, but is also deployed ethically to augment colleagues' day-to-day work. So both externally and through, for client-facing work as well as for internal in NatWest. Previously, he has served as the first group head, actually, of data and AI ethics at Lloyds Banking Group, and has a PhD. He has been a pioneer in autonomous agents, another area I'm really looking forward to talking about, and focused on enterprise AI transformation, responsible AI frameworks in highly regulated industries. So very excited to welcome you, Paul. Welcome to the show, and it's absolutely wonderful to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely to be here, Pamela.
Thank you. And would you like to add anything in your intro?
Oh, no, you've been very generous with that introduction. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you. So I'd like to start off with your thought leadership and visionary outlook, Paul. You got a PhD in AI in the 1990s, and you were working on autonomous agents before most people even knew what AI was. So, and you also then spent years in finance and decided to come back into the corporate world and to return to AI around 2018.
Correct.
So can you talk a little bit about that? What was the catalyst?
Of course, Pamela. Well, yes, you're right. In the 1990s, I did a PhD in artificial intelligence. I was introduced to AI while I was doing a computer science degree at Manchester University here in the north of England. And I was immediately hooked. And in those days, Pamela, AI was really about AGI. We were trying to solve the artificial general intelligence problem and make machines that are capable rather than just narrow. And the idea of autonomous agents, both single agent systems and multi-agent systems, was a niche within the broader AI landscape. And there were researchers looking at this, predominantly in the US, and I would say a handful in the UK. So we were a small community. There were conferences and there were journals, but I would say it was quite a small set of researchers globally. And I found the concept of an agent and what we now call agentic AI as just something that would naturally come about. I didn't for 1 minute think that this was not achievable. obviously, I had no idea it would come about as rapidly as it has in the last 5 years. But for me, there was no doubt that one day that we would have these things called autonomous agents, and then quite naturally they would converse with each other and communicate to build what we now know of as multi-agent systems. So Pamela, I did research. I taught natural language processing at undergraduate level. I published some research papers. But Pamela, the key thing was in the mid-90s, it was, of course, one of the AI winters, and it was the third AI winter. So research grants were very hard to get in this particular field. And it became just really, really difficult to continue to do research. And I, along with quite a few people in my area, we moved into finance and using technology to build systems for large banks. So I was drawn to the City of London, and it was quite a buoyant industry. So I spent basically, I would say, from the late 90s to the mid 2015, 16, 17, building enterprise-wide systems for banks, predominantly in trading, risk, and very much in risk management. So that would be large systems, enterprise-wide, that consume data from many systems and generate for numbers for finance. So typically financial engineering, derivatives, and that kind of thing. So it's a really, really interesting, quite intellectually challenging. And then Pamela, around about 2015, 16, I started thinking, look, I really want to go back into mainstream AI because we were hearing about it a lot. We were hearing about collaborative filtering. We were hearing a lot about machine learning. The big tech companies were implementing it. Amazon recommendations, Netflix recommendations. It was becoming more mainstream in conversation. And it appeared to me that this would be really interesting. So I left quite a good job for a large Swiss bank actually at the time. And I said at quite a ripe old age of late 40s at the time, I really want to go back into AI. So it was a leap of faith. And I did spend about a year, predominantly during COVID. I was online, I was learning Keras, TensorFlow, Python, programming, and I was absolutely amazed at some of the tools we've now got to build neural networks in half a dozen lines of code. I mean, I was blown away. This kind of stuff you'd have to write everything from scratch in the old days. And as I was working on this, Pamela, I came across the word AI ethics, and I thought, what has ethics got to do with AI? And because this wasn't discussed in the 90s, and I started reading about it. That was it. The penny dropped. I thought, my goodness, we've got a real problem. Right? We're going to have no end of brilliant scientists building systems, but there won't be as many people, I think, who will really appreciate the ethical concerns of AI. So at that point onwards, that's what I wanted to specialize in. I managed to land a job working for a Japanese tech company leading AI ethics research in their London labs. And then I was approached by Lloyds Bank, and then I ended up at NatWest Bank to do the role that I now do. So I have actually ended up, after many years, going back to not only the topic that I love, but I think doing a meaningful part of doing some meaningful work within the topic of AI, which is all around AI governance and responsible AI.
Wow. That is so great to hear because, I've been in this area for so long.
Yeah.
And I arrived here took a very different path to get here also. But because I'm coming from cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But speaking of the AI winter, though, I remember creating an expert system in the 90s, Paul, for building a smart house and just even using all the rules that were required for electrical that were easier to bake in that governance in expert systems than in that what the systems are that we're looking at now. It is a interesting journey that or the trajectory that you took from those almost static and easy to contain AI systems to what the open-ended systems that they became with machine learning and with other iterations of AI. Really interesting.
Exactly. And I think just on that, I was saying for me, Pamela, right, my specialism was symbolic AI. So really it was, you talk about expert systems, and clearly they proved not to be able to scale and generalize well for a myriad of reasons.
Right.
The probabilistic approach, which was talked about in the 90s, is now the approach that has actually surfaced to be seemingly far more capable and has taken the world by storm. The
Right.
probabilistic approach is the thing that gives rise to the ethical challenges that you talk about and I talk about. So this new, I still think of it as a fairly new wave of AI. This is the one that has really, I think, surfaced the real need to do governance properly. With great generality of these systems comes these greater risks, and they're quite nuanced, and as you know very well, they require strict governance and a lot of control.
Right. Absolutely critical point, Paul, because we are at that cusp, and we've been, I would say, even in 2020, right? For example, when we're looking at the algorithmic failures we were seeing around credit card application denials, or the AWS system that or Amazon was looking at hiring,
Yes.
using hiring is right. And you're right, when the conversation changed, and that is indeed a very much more complex area than what AI started out being. So which takes me then to my next question, which is, we've talked about a little bit about probabilistic versus deterministic, right? Um, you're emphasizing that AI models are probabilistic, not deterministic, and this then, like we just said, will changes the risk profile and the risk landscape. What? But you also are talking about, and you're in the area of finance, and the financial services context is extremely regulated,
Mm.
and the risk tolerance is very low. So, would you say financial services are the perfect crucible for a responsible AI?
Well, I think, yeah, you're right, heavily regulated. But the second thing about financial services, which makes it so, I think, such a useful test bed, let's put it that way, is that the decisions banks make affect people and their livelihoods in quite dramatic ways. So loan decisioning, mortgages, insurance underwriting, these kind of decisions have a direct impact on people's lives in a substantial way. So I think the technologies banks utilize, and they do utilize some leading edge technologies. That's the other thing about banking, is that a lot of the technologies that are used are predominantly leading edge, and banks have deep pockets, so they can work with big tech companies. They can hire very good data scientists, and they can really push the boundaries of technological capability. But the combination of strict regulation means that it's a great test bed for us to be able to ensure that the practices we put in are resilient and robust. So for me, financial services is ideally placed to kind of lead the way to demonstrate how to do governance properly. I feel very fortunate that I'm working in that industry. I'm also really fortunate because certainly in the UK, AI governance is taken very seriously. A lot of people approach me, Paul, can I work in your team? That they're very generous. I've had no end of people, even in my previous job at Lloyds Bank, they would approach me. So the desire of people to want to work in this field is really heartening, Pamela. Honestly, I think it's a superb thing, and we should harness that.
Yeah, let's talk then about what is that complexity of the probabilistic and that AI, the unique risks that AI is posing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have 9 principles, for example, in the book that you co-authored, which is a fabulous book, by the way.
Thank you.
And you've talked about 9 key risk areas for AI deployment. Everybody's talking about bias, but you've managed a much more comprehensive landscape, right? So it's not just about ethics, for example, right? So let me ask you, let's talk through and walk through the risk taxonomy of those 9 areas. What are they? And then I do have some follow-up questions for you.
Of,
And a lot of them.
of course. What I'll do is let me just touch on that point that you raised about deterministic versus probabilistic, or deterministic versus non-deterministic. I think for your listeners today, the key thing to take away is AI up to about the 90s was based on expert systems. Expert systems had rules, almost like if then else type of rules. There were things like knowledge graphs, semantic networks. These things encoded relationships between entities. They still exist today, but in those days, those expert systems really determined how an AI system would operate. So when an AI system made a decision or an outcome, you could actually trace a series of rules that had been activated in the generation of the final response. So in those days, AI was traceable, was tractable, and was explainable, and therefore very transparent. Really, you could see where a mistake could happen, and you could see why a result was achieved. Predominantly, that was the case. With the systems that we have at the moment, so obviously ChatGPT being the kind of the key one that's on everyone's mind, but there are many LLMs being built by the foundation model providers. What they have is that they've created a model, and in this model are these we call parameters, sometimes hundreds of billions of parameters. Each parameter is a floating point number. They interact in ways that are non-deterministic to us as people. We, ahead of time, when you create a prompt, you push a prompt through a model, the activations in that model and the way those numbers behave is not predetermined. And therefore, when the response comes out, you can't go back and trace through everything that happened in the model to produce the answer. It's quite bizarre to non-specialists to try and understand this, that AI practitioners have built something so complex that when it runs, they can't tell you why it produced the answer it produced. And that's actually where we've landed with these large models. And it's the transformer and neural network architecture that underlies them that has all of the complexity. So with that, you get a lack of traceability, explainability. These models are sometimes called black boxes, so they're opaque. And in essence, at the heart of it, that is why we have the problems that we have at the moment, and why we have to put AI governance in place, and why we have to manage a series of what I call risks. Now, don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean all of these probabilistic models are terrible and we shouldn't use them. And they can be harnessed to be really, really good. And the key thing in the book that we wrote called AI governance, governing the machine, was what do you have to do to ensure that the behavior of the model is what you want it to be, and the things you don't want to happen don't happen. So the key thing is to think of these large AI systems like your ChatGPTs and your LLMs as very broad systems, very wide, can do a lot of things, but what you want to do is harness them so the things that you want them to do, they do robustly and rigorously, and they don't do the things you don't want them to do. And at its essence, that's what it's about. So moving on to those 9 key risk areas, I mean, I can talk a lot about them, but clearly we haven't got time. What we did, we tried to distill all of the risks that we found in things like ISO, IEEE, the OECD principles, the EU AI Act, the UK principles and voluntary principles. We tried to distill them into what we thought were the real key ones. And there's significant overlaps between all of them, of course, but we wanted to enumerate the key ones. And I think, one of them, accuracy and reliability. So what do you have to do to make sure the model is reliable, so it produces the same result repeatedly, but is also accurate every time it does so? And in the book, we lay out a series of technical tools, as well as governance processes within an organization that they can create to make that happen. Fairness and bias is another one. So as we know from the machine learning days and from the Amazon example you talked about, where AI ethics really emerged in about 2015 was through bias and discrimination, where certain people were discriminated against. And clearly there are techniques to resolve that. And a lot of that is about fixing the data that goes into your model, debiasing it. Another key risk is, I just mentioned it, transparency, explainability. Now, you can't explain how the model works, but there are some technologies and tools that you can implement in the model development lifecycle that give you some key guidance as to what drove a model to make the decision that it made. Accountability is another key risk area. So accountability is when a model goes wrong, which team within the organization should be responsible for A, ensuring it shouldn't have happened, and B, taking corrective action when it does happen. So that one is really about ownership. And the thing about AI risks is that there are accuracy risks, there's security risks, there's data privacy risks, there's risks that emanate in different areas. So sometimes there's not one team that's accountable. So within an organization, you have to mobilize your teams in such a way that each team knows what it's accountable for in the risk landscape. So accountability is all about how do you do that. That's a lot about how you organize your teams. Privacy is a key one, right? We know AI models can leak data. So privacy is core to what banks do. Our customers' data, we hold that very dear. In the EU, clearly we have the GDPR regulations, which have become somewhat of a standard. So put on GDPR, we talk about privacy in that way. Security is another one. Security is a really big one because we've heard of jailbreaking, prompt hacking, and these techniques that nefarious actors can take to break a model or get a model to reveal something that you shouldn't. So how do you implement security guardrails? That's another important area. And very quickly, I think three, maybe more strategic risks: intellectual property and confidentiality. So of course, we hear far more now about how some people claim IP infringement from models that have been trained on people who are creatives on their data to produce something really amazing that is somewhat similar now to the creator's work. So how do we ensure that an organization doesn't breach intellectual property or confidentiality? Because at the end of the day, when a bank deploys a model, it's responsible for the model's results. A bank can deploy a model that's an open AI model, but the output of the model that the bank produces is the responsibility of the bank. So they have to take this IP risk extremely seriously. And another risk is, what's the risk to our employees? So the impact on our workforce. How does our workforce change? How do we make sure that AI and humans work together collaboratively and effectively and do better work than is currently the case? That's a really, really big topic. And finally, something that's really, really close to my heart, Pamela, is environmental and sustainability. So we're very aware now that these really, really large models are compute intensive, energy intensive. Training models depletes water resources, and the proliferation of data centers. It seems to me that the building of and utilization of these huge models is on a collision course with our environmental sustainability requirements globally. And we talk in the book about how organizations should take responsibility for understanding the environmental impact of their use of AI. And we provide some guidance and some early thoughts on how organizations can embed sustainability considerations into AI risk management. So those are a whistle-stop tour of what we think are the 9 thematic risk areas.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Definitely very aligned on this, right? But the framework I mentioned to you that I created 7 years ago or 6 years ago have these elements where the privacy and security are at the foundation, right? Because if your foundation is not secure, even for AI systems, non-generative AI, even for traditional AI systems, right? For machine learning systems that we're using that have been used before the advent of Gen AI, right? There are unique risks that AI brings, and to tackle them, it does require that holistic approach of those 8 pillars that I created, and you have 9, which is the love to talk to you offline about some of the compare notes on that. But one thing I will mention though for the audience is that some of the areas that Paul just ran through. Thank you so much, because that puts a very holistic view of those risks, is we are seeing this is not a problem that's been solved, right? So we're seeing things that are making the news, even where you're seeing a evidence of AI risks such as bias. There was a major law. It's a class action lawsuit right now against a company which is a health insurance provider in the U.S., and they had rolled out a system with a high level of inaccuracy, taken out the human in the loop, meaning they had people who were looking at the output but were not considering that in the part of the process. So they had a very high error rate, but also was seen to be taking biased decisions based on age and disability, which is the very reason the system was being rolled out for, was for helping with health insurance claims for disability. So clearly a high impact system, right? This is not a problem just because it has been categorized, is not solved, right? We are really going to have to work together to get the awareness out why and how these AI risks are playing a role in our daily lives, and what are these high impact systems that can impact each and every one of us. And I just want to say one more thing, Paul, which is you talked about something that I had coined a phrase for, which is we need responsible AI or trustworthy AI for intended outcomes from AI. And I think that you were saying in the beginning, you were talking about making a point about the knowing what your systems are and knowing what you can get out of them if you want to get what think your business objectives are, and what it aligns with your vision, it aligns with the objectives. You'll have to kind of be aware of what those risks are, and putting those right guardrails in place. So definitely align with you on that. Very much so.
And just for your listeners as well, just to be aware, the book talks about those 9 risk areas with respect to not only generative AI, but what you call traditional AI. So traditional AI, I think, if I understand you correctly, is machine learning, what we know of as ML. So we talk about all of those 9 risk areas with respect to both machine learning and generative AI. So we decided it warranted a split in terms of treatment, because also the tools and techniques for mitigating each of those 9 risks in ML and Gen AI can be different. So we talk about all of those, and since your point around bias and fairness, it is really quite amazing that it can still exist in the way that it does. But it tells you one thing: it tells you how it can creep into a system completely unknown. It never is clearly in the intention of any developer to introduce any kind of bias into the system. But there are many points in the model development lifecycle, right from sourcing training data, right to post-deployment in model drift, where bias can be introduced in a number of different areas. So it's a really thorny problem to tackle, quite insidious, and has to be thought about really carefully. There are fortunately lots of tools and metrics, but the selection of your tools and metrics has to be done carefully with respect to your use case, because they're not all appropriate for every use case.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. That's such a great and important point, that there's really no way of scaling the AI governance easily, right? It is going to be, a lot of it is going to be very use case specific.
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned EU AI Act also at one of the the points you made. Paul, can you talk a little bit about that's already in force, right? It's already in place.
Correct.
What are the immediate implications for financial institutions or for other organizations? What should be they're looking at right now?
I think so for those listeners that might not be familiar with the overall scheme of the Act, what it does is, it's called a horizontal act. Some people call it a harmonized act. And what that means is the EU have categorized uses of AI into different categories of risk. So there are prohibited uses of AI, which are ones that are outlawed. Then there's those ones that are called high risk, and then those medium and those low risk. So a prohibited use of AI could be using AI for surveillance or for inferring people's emotions from video capture technology. So those kind of things that people would, normal people on the street would think, that's a bit spooky. I wouldn't want anyone inferring how I feel or what I might want to do on the basis of CCTV footage or my emotional indicators. So these kind of things are banned and outlawed. So right now, if you have an AI system used in the EU, and this is the point, if it's used in the EU on an EU citizen, then you can't deploy that system. And there's fines for having those systems live. That's been the case since early this year. Then the next category is high-risk systems. So high-risk systems are those where a decision is being made about a person. So banking is a classic. Credit lending is the classic example where a bank is making a decision on a loan for a person that clearly affects that person. The other areas are in health, in public services, in housing, in those areas where really people's fundamental rights are affected by the decision. And then medium and low risk categories are uses of AI where if there is a mistake in the AI, yes, there is an issue, but it's not so significant. So that's what it is. It's cross industry. So it doesn't matter if you are in healthcare, financial services, construction, or whatever industry, you're judged on the basis of your use case. And right now, what the EU AI mandates is that organizations have to have a risk management framework in place. They have to document all of the controls they have in place. They have to document under quality the risk mitigation techniques that they've employed. They have to demonstrate the results of the risk mitigation that they've had. And they have to be able to do that if requested to show that evidence to the European Union. So the Act in of itself is really about ensuring that organizations put all of the controls in place and that they have key representatives looking after and managing and mitigating those risks that AI might impose. There are staggered timelines for compliance. So as of right now, if you have a high-risk AI system, you need to be compliant with the Act by August 2026, August the 2nd, in fact. So really, a lot of large organizations, including banks like ours, they're putting in all of the governance and framework within their organization to make sure that they comply with the Act for that key date of August 2026.
Yeah, that's quite a task, quite a tall order, and will require, of course, a lot of effort and a systematic approach, a thought out approach, and nothing better than your book, which, by the way, I definitely want to get it autographed when we meet next week or in a few weeks, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, my main point being there are so many components to this, right? When we look at AI risks and AI governance, the average person who is either a developer or a user or looking at it from a business perspective, one of the questions that I get asked a lot from the broader community is, what are the AI risks? Does AI pose risk? And are they easy to identify, right? And the answer to both of them, of course, that's what we've been talking about. One thing I want to kind of, maybe it's a circle, right? We started with agents and your study and your PhD around agentic AI, and going back to where, we see the systems and the transformation in terms of what are the AI systems that we are using, what are the forms we're using it in. It's so pervasive, it's even hard to tell, your traditional systems from generative AI and now to agentic AI. Well, I'd love to hear from you as to going from generative AI to agentic AI. Are there unique risks that we need to worry about from a governance and a trust perspective? What uh, what are they? If if that's the answer is yes,
Yes.
what are they, and can you please provide some insight on that?
Of course, Pamela. I think one thing maybe for your listeners that might not be too close to this is just to understand the difference between generative AI and agentic AI, because this field moves so quickly, it's actually really hard to keep up. So for me anyway, agentic AI is not like a new AI, like a transformer and a GPT model. The chat GPTs and your Claudes and those kind of models, they're based on this architecture called a transformer model. And that was quite a step change, right? That was introduced in 2017, actually, by some research work in Google, as it appears. That was a step change. That was a new algorithm. And the creation of that algorithm, along with lots of data, introduced the power that we see in ChatGPT. Agentic AI is not a new one of those. It's not that some researchers have got in a lab and suddenly invented something called an agent and it's completely new. Agentic AI is actually using an LLM, but using it in two different ways, or two additional ways. One is, as you can see, a large language model, it takes input as a text and generates a response in English in text. Well, it's quite easy to see how you could put two of these LLMs together and get one to talk to the other, where one might respond to a question and pose another question to another model, and that model answers that question and sends a result back. So you could see how you can quite intuitively kind of chain these things together and get them to talk to each other. So the ability of an LLM to communicate with something else is part of what is agentic. And what's been developed is not only one LLM talking to another, and that now we call them agents, but now we've developed technologies that allow an LLM to call another system, like interrogate a database, or call another system and execute a task in another system in an organization. And there's two technologies that at the moment seem to be key to allowing that conversation to happen between an LLM and a tool, and that's MCP, Model Context Protocol, and A2A, A in the number two, and A, agent to agent, which is a communication protocol developed, I think, by Google predominantly. So now what that does is that opens up an LLM so that if you fire a response into it, it can then call other tools or call other agents to do things on their behalf and then bring a result back. So it's opened up the ability of LLMs to communicate and delegate tasks. So that's agentic. The other thing that makes an LLM an agent is this thing that's called reasoning. So reasoning, we humans reason, we think, that's what we do. And now some of our model providers are talking about reasoning models. So this is really encapsulated in something called chain of thought. So for example, if you use Gemini Deep Research, which is one of the Google models, and you look at what it does when you ask it a prompt, it will tell you that it's going to do a number of other things. It's going to, in effect, take your prompt, pull it apart, and then do a number of, almost generate internal prompts that then go off and go back through the LLM. So what the large language model is doing is generating more intermediate prompts itself and answering them itself, and then pulling the whole answer together. So this is kind of called reasoning. It's not human reasoning, but our tech companies have called it that. So those are the two things, Pamela, for your listeners to be aware of: the difference between generative and agentic AI. And I think to your earlier question, it does introduce some new risks. When we wrote the book, predominantly in 2024 and early 25, agentic AI was just emerging. Just understanding what it was just emerging. And we put some references in the book to early risks of agentic AI. And one of the key ones is security. So when you ask an LLM a question and it communicates with something else, what security controls have been put around both those systems to ensure that data that goes from one to the other is A, authenticated, is B, is correct, and that the data has privacy controls around it. So the ability to pass data and results between different systems and different LLMs means that every single LLM and every single tool needs to have security and privacy and accountability built into it, so that when you look at everything together, it still is a system that behaves under proper rules and is governed well. So if you like, the governance requirements have kind of moved up a notch. They become that much more complex because you've got a more complex landscape of systems interacting, where each system might be a Gen AI system. So one should think of it like a web of agents doing a lot more. So therefore, all of the things we talk about in our book have to be done for every system and then done for the whole system as a whole. And I think security and accountability are probably two of the biggest issues that we're going to encounter. And technology providers are fortunately building tools to help us identify and mitigate those. But it's really early days, right? We still need to do a lot more work. I hope that.
Yeah, I have a undergrad in psychology, and that makes me think of the Gestalt way of looking at the whole is more than a sum of its parts, and it's not true for any other scenario more than for agentic AI, right? Because given you're right, it's changing. It's unprecedented. Some of the ways that it's coming together is unprecedented from a risk perspective. We talk about AI's agents that can go rogue, for example, right? There is the whole dimension to it, and you mentioned security, and one thing I'd like to mention though, which will be interesting, is that MCP servers by default are not. They don't have authentication in place. So you have to, just because we are moving up the risk level and we need higher forms of governance and risk mitigation, we can't forget the age-old, what are the required cybersecurity hygiene even practices in place, that these systems should have a way of authenticating, right? And by that I mean an MCP server that is now controlling your entry into other systems, whether it's to databases or to other systems. If that where you're housing the head or the control tower is not protected, it can very quickly cascade as a risk into the entire ecosystem of what is going into place. So yes, very, very definitely a dynamic risk territory, very changing at a speed where the AI governance needs to keep pace at the speed of the dynamic nature of the AI system. So really excited about what we can do to put our arms together, arms around this problem, because it's clearly a growing and it's got a life and a existence of its own. So we have to keep pace with it.
Exactly.
Cool. Any final thoughts before I ask you my lightning question? Lightning question.
I think, look, just building on that, I think agentic AI as well. A lot of organizations are talking about replacing entire workforces with teams of agents. I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves when we talk like that. I mean, I come from working in large organizations over a period of almost 30 years, building systems that span different business units, they span departments, systems that orchestrate large workflows, complex workflows, handoffs between teams, handoffs between databases and systems and workflows. These are complex and often involve people that have a lot of tacit knowledge. I call it tacit knowledge. A lot of knowledge around how the systems that work, the nuances of systems, where systems fail, how they're not accurate. And organizations have built expertise within their organizations that are with humans. And I think it's quite ambitious to think that at this stage we can just deploy a team of agents and it will do all of that work rather than those teams of humans. I think human work in the kind of organizations I've worked in is complex and really, really hard to completely streamline and automate using agents. LLMs, the core of LLMs, what they're really good at is searching through large amounts of data, synthesizing data, filtering it, summarizing it, surfacing, if your prompt is right, surfacing key things which your prompt will look for. They're really good at that kind of, it's almost data mining. Very, very good at that. But that is only one part of what we do in complex organizations and workflows. There is a lot more things that we do. And I think stretching LLMs to do a lot more than they're currently designed to do, A, is hard. And B, if we try and do it and we're not careful, then these risks are going to become even more paramount. So we have to be really careful and tread really carefully how we go about building these agentic AI systems. But then equally, the key thing is the workforce. How do we get our people in our organizations to use AI as a tool to increase their productivity? Not the AI increase productivity, the AI increase the productivity of the people that do the job that they do, and ideally allow them to do more of the things that they can't do that they wish they could do better. So for example, looking after vulnerable customers, looking after parts of our customer base that doesn't get the attention that it might, just because, you know, every organization is stretched. Budgets are always hard. They're the fault for in every organization. And clearly I would talk to a lot of teams that want to do more, but either they're limited by their systems or they're limited by something. And imagine if AI could uplift the work we do, automate some of the automatable things, the mundane things, free up time to allow organizations to imagine how they can do the things that they really want to do, that I think can be beneficial to society. And for me, that's a really, really cool part of how we talk about AI within organizations and how we navigate the path to a good, not just a safe, but a good, wholesome deployment.
I think that's such an important point, well, because for a organization to successfully adopt AI, you know, the workforce to adopt AI, they need to be able to trust that it's not going to take their job, right? It's not going to replace them.
Correct.
And also be taught how to use it, you know, given education, awareness, training, and other tools to really be able to use AI to augment their functionality, their work, and use it better to do work better. But that can only come if there is that trust that this is not going to be replacing, you know, humans.
Yeah.
So as a workforce. Okay, so that brings us to our to our last question, which is a fun question, and I'd love to know: are you AI utopian, AI dystopian, or AI disciplined?
Oh, AI discipline. Now that's an interesting one. Okay, I've heard of the choice of are you utopian or dystopian as a binary one, but AI discipline, that's really interesting. So Pamela, I'm gonna make the statement. On the whole, I'm more utopian, but it takes discipline. For me, I think what we have here, we do have a key point in our existence. The prospect of potentially AI having intelligence equal to us or beyond, right? I mean, that's a question that we've never really had to contend with. But it now appears that we are on potentially the cusp of that. And I think that's a profound thing to have to deal with. So we have choices to make. And I think the choices we have to make are around how do we get AI to be beneficial for us as a society, us as a workforce, in families, in all parts of our lives. Because now AI is dispersed. It's dispersed everywhere, right? And it's going to carry on. And there's a lot of money ensuring that it will carry on. So how do we navigate the path to make sure that it's utopian? And that requires all of the things that I've talked about, all of the great work that you've done with tips. It requires people to be thought leaders, to ensure that organizations have the discipline through risk management and governance to ensure all of that happens, to lobby governments, to lobby policymakers, to work with them so that we can make sure that AI is a pro-innovation, that we innovate. We don't want to slow down innovation. So governance is not there to slow things down. Governance is there to put, as you say in your great words, to put the discipline in so that innovation can happen quickly and happen with certainty and happen safely. So if we get the governance right, we will get to the utopian part quicker, safer, and in a more inclusive way. So I think the choices we make now will determine where we get to. And I'm confident that if we put enough work in collectively, worldwide, that we can make those right choices and get us down that path rather than some messy, horrible path, which nobody really wants to see, let's face it. But it requires discipline to get there. And many, many stakeholders, not just tech specialists, organizational theorists, like I said, policymakers, lawyers, governments, a lot of people have to wade in here and do some work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that is a brilliant conclusion. Brilliant thought. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you.
It's a pleasure being on, Pamela. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.